In exploring the role of women in ancient Greek society, it is crucial to begin by contextualizing their position within this historical framework. Ancient Greek society was predominantly patriarchal, with women generally occupying subordinate roles to men. Womanhood was often defined by their roles as wives, mothers, and caretakers, confined primarily to the domestic sphere. Exceptions existed, such as in Sparta, where women had relatively more rights and influence, but these were deviations rather than the norm. Understanding this context is essential to grasp the limited avenues for autonomy and influence available to women in ancient Greece. The significance of contextualizing women's roles in ancient Greece lies in how it illuminates our understanding of gender dynamics and societal structures of the time. By examining these roles, we gain insight into the foundational principles of Western civilization and the enduring legacy of these gender norms. It helps highlight the contrast between ancient restrictions and contemporary movements toward gender equality, underscoring both historical progress and persistent challenges. For example, in Athens, women could not vote, own property independently, or participate in political discourse. Their lives were largely dictated by their fathers or husbands, a stark illustration of male-dominated governance. In literature, female characters such as Antigone from Sophocles' play challenge these norms, acting against male authority and showcasing the tension between personal agency and societal expectations. Opinions supporting this concept often argue that understanding these historical roles sheds light on the roots of contemporary gender inequality, highlighting the systemic nature of patriarchal oppression. Feminist historians emphasize the importance of re-evaluating these roles to uncover the contributions of women that might otherwise be obscured by a male-centric view of history. Controversies and alternative viewpoints do exist, particularly regarding the extent to which women exercised informal influence. Some scholars argue that despite formal restrictions, women held considerable sway within the household and social spheres, subtly influencing political and cultural developments. This contextual understanding not only connects to broader discussions on the social structures of ancient Greece, but also influences how we perceive individual women's narratives within this historical setting. It sets the stage for further exploration into specific roles, such as priestesses or poets, allowing for a nuanced appreciation of women's multifaceted contributions to ancient Greek society. Through this lens, we can better appreciate the complexities of gender roles in history and their implications for modern social justice movements. In ancient Greek society, the legal status and citizenship of women played a pivotal role in shaping their lives and social standing. Unlike men, women were generally excluded from being full citizens. This exclusion was significant, as it meant that women couldn't participate in the political processes that defined the civic life, such as voting or holding public office. A woman's identity and legal persona were largely defined by her relationship to male guardians like fathers, husbands, or sons, reflecting a society where gender determined one's rights and societal roles. The legal status of women is crucial to understanding their broader role in Greek society because it highlights the limitations placed on them socially, politically, and economically. Ancient Greece's legal structure allowed women little autonomy or authority, despite their critical roles in domestic and religious spheres. For instance, while women in Sparta had relatively more freedom compared to those in Athens, including owning property and receiving some education, they were still barred from political participation. One example that illustrates these differences is the role of the oikos, or household. Women in Athens were expected to manage the household, weaving and supervising slaves, underscoring their perceived role as caretakers rather than active participants in public life. Another example is the religious domain, where women could exercise significant influence. Priestesses, such as the Pythia at Delphi, wielded considerable spiritual authority, showing that women could hold power, albeit in limited contexts. Support for the idea of distinct legal restrictions on women can be found in the works of philosophers like Aristotle, who argued that women were naturally inferior to men and thus should be subordinate. However, these views were not universally accepted, with playwrights like Euripides often exploring themes of female resistance and intelligence, challenging societal norms. Controversies surrounding this issue include debates over the extent to which these restrictions were a product of gender discrimination or practical considerations of societal function. Some argue that the exclusion of women was a pragmatic measure for maintaining social order, while others see it as an unjust marginalization. This point about legal status and citizenship interconnects with other aspects of women's roles by framing the broader context in which they navigated daily life, influencing their social interactions, economic opportunities, and family dynamics. It underscores a systemic structure that, while seemingly immutable, was subject to subtle resistance and interpretation as women found ways to exert influence within and beyond the confines of their prescribed roles. In ancient Greek society, the roles of women within the household primarily centered around domestic duties and marriage. Women were seen as the main caretakers of the home, responsible for managing household affairs including cooking, cleaning, and raising children. Marriage was a fundamental institution in Greek society, with women's roles often defined by their status as wives and mothers. This concept of domestic roles underscores the structured gender norms of the time, where women's activities were largely confined to the private sphere. The significance of domestic duties and marriage in ancient Greece cannot be overstated. These roles were pivotal in maintaining the social fabric and ensuring the continuity of familial lineage. Managing the household not only involved practical responsibilities, but also upheld cultural and religious traditions, making women vital to the perpetuation of Greek customs. Moreover, marriage was both an economic and social contract, strengthening alliances between families and securing women's social status and security. Two compelling examples highlight these roles. First, in classical Athens, women rarely participated in public life. Instead, they were expected to oversee household slaves and ensure the efficient operation of the family estate. This supervision was crucial for the household's prosperity, demonstrating that their role, while private, was indispensable. Another example is the Spartan society, where women were granted slightly more freedom, yet were still tasked with managing domestic affairs. They bore the responsibility of raising strong children, especially sons, who would later become warriors, highlighting women's indirect influence on warfare and public life. Support for these roles often comes from historical texts and philosophers like Xenophon, who suggested that women's inherent nature suited them to household management. However, modern perspectives challenge this view, arguing that these roles were largely enforced by a patriarchal society that limited women's potential. This concept does invite controversies and alternative viewpoints, particularly regarding women's lack of participation in politics and public decision-making. Critics argue that the confinement of women to the domestic sphere robbed Greek society of broader contributions that women could have made. While some city-states like Sparta afforded women more rights and responsibilities, the overarching Greek norm limited their influence largely to the private domain. The roles of women within the household also strongly influence other aspects of ancient Greek society, including their religious activities, as women often took part in domestic religious rituals. Furthermore, these roles highlighted the broader societal values that emphasized family and societal continuity over personal aspirations. As a reflection of broader cultural dynamics, understanding these domestic roles provides essential insights into the complexity of gender roles in ancient Greece and the societal structures supporting them. In ancient Greek society, women played a pivotal role in religious activities, with significant involvement as priestesses and participants in religious festivals. This aspect of their lives provided them with a unique avenue for influence and status within a predominantly patriarchal society. Priestesses often held esteemed positions and were responsible for maintaining the sanctity of temples and conducting rituals, which were essential for both personal and communal spiritual well-being. This not only conferred a degree of power and respect upon them, but also enabled women to wield spiritual authority, a domain relatively separate from the otherwise male-dominated public life. An illustrative example of women's religious involvement can be seen in the cult of Demeter, where priestesses played crucial roles in the Eleusinian mysteries, exclusive and highly revered religious ceremonies. These mysteries were believed to bestow prosperity and a blessed afterlife, highlighting the indispensable role of women in their facilitation. Another example is the position of the Pythia, the high priestess of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, who was considered the mouthpiece of the god. Her prophecies held great political and social influence across the Greek world. Supporters of women's religious participation often argue that these roles offered women opportunities for autonomy and influence not otherwise available to them. Through religious activities, women could exercise leadership, engage with the divine, and impact decision-making processes, albeit indirectly. However, challenges and controversies arise when considering the extent of this influence. While women's roles in religion offered some autonomy, they were still largely restricted to specific functions designated by men. Furthermore, participation in religious life did not necessarily translate into broader social or political freedoms. Alternate viewpoints suggest that the allowance of female religious participation was primarily a means to uphold traditional social structures, as religious roles did not threaten male authority, but rather reinforced the societal order by keeping women engaged within defined boundaries. This spiritual influence was largely symbolic and did not extend beyond religious contexts. The integration of women into religious life was, thus, both a reflection and reinforcer of their status in ancient Greek society. It connected to other aspects of their roles by providing a socially acceptable sphere of influence. Understanding this connection highlights the complexities and limitations of women's agency in ancient Greece, revealing how intertwined gender roles were with cultural and religious practices, ultimately shaping societal norms and worldview.